So thank you for joining us today. My name is Rebecca Attenborough and I am a Senior Campaign Manager in UK Marketing at the Department for International Trade. One of the things I wanted to highlight to you before we get started is just some general guidance that's been published by the government and I wanted to draw your attention to. There is some new guidance available about working safely during coronavirus. So this is available online at the URL on the first bullet point. There's also various FAQs, information about business support, as well as the full government's COVID-19 recovery strategy. Moving on to today's session, you'll be hearing from two of our fantastic international trade advisors. We've got Simon Bedford and Arshad Dadabhoy. These two will be taking you through the core presentation, which will last for around 40 minutes. And then we've got Brian Dent, another one of your international trade advisors, who will be reviewing all of your questions as they come through, and he'll be helping filter those and direct them to Simon and Arshad at the end. So without further ado, I will hand over to Simon.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar, Managing Overseas Agents and Distributors During COVID-19. So whether you're a very experienced exporter looking to work and manage distributors and agents overseas, or whether you're fairly new to exporting, hopefully there's something in here for all of you, and hopefully it's practical advice we're going to be giving. So 6 key questions during COVID-19 then. Why do you need an agent or distributor? Where to get some advice at this time? Who to appoint, identifying and assessing potential agents and distributors? What payment terms you should be offering to your distributors at what a fairly difficult time for some companies with cash flow? When's the right time to appoint them? And how can you use the current situation to really build your relationship? Before we go any further, I just want to flag up the information that's available on the GREAT portal, great.gov.uk. You can see across the top there's an advice section, markets and services. Within the advice section, there's 9 different sections highlighted. So whether you're looking at managing payments, finding an export market, creating an export plan, preparing to do business in a foreign country, there's lots of very useful information there. And we're talking about agents and distributors today, which is really part of the section on there, which is about defining routes to market. So I would encourage you to have a look at that. It's very recently been brought up to date at the back end of last year, so very relevant and practical information. So talking about routes to market then, and where do agents and distributors sit? If you look at this particular graph, everything's a combination of risk and control. So down at the bottom left-hand corner, UK customers and suppliers. So if you were just supplying to component parts to a company in Liverpool, Manchester, London, and they were consolidating and shipping overseas for you, we'd call that indirect export. At the opposite end of the bubbles, setting up your own overseas foreign company. And you can see that very soon on the bubbles, you see agents and distributors. So in terms of a low cost, practical, easy way to get help on the ground in an overseas market, it is a good combination of control and limited risk and expense for you. So what sort of agent or distributor do you want to appoint? It's a good idea just to think about what qualities you'd be looking for in this ideal partner. And a few ideas. Are we looking for someone with loyalty, who's well connected, professional, knowledgeable, honest? You can see the list there. And I think we would know, talking to you, whether you'd got someone who was well placed, who you got on well with, because the last 2 bullets on there, you'd be talking to us about the fact that this was really a partnership and that you had a great relationship. So if you think about the qualities that is important to you in an ideal agent or distributor, because a few months after appointing them, if they really aren't working with you in the way you'd like, you'll soon realize that you've appointed the right person. Certain of these will be deal breakers for you. So at the beginning, what do they do for you? Introduce your products or services to potential clients in an agreed territory. The simple difference, the agent's paid on commission, whereas the distributor actually purchases products and acts as a reseller. Distributors are sometimes called dealers. You could regard a distributor as just being a big customer because you're selling to them, they're paying you, and they're reselling. Advantages and disadvantages. Well, certainly if you appoint the right partner, they've got market knowledge, they've got experience, they've got good contacts, they've got the opportunity to grow your your exports more quickly. But depending how it works out, have you appointed the right person after an initial period, there may be insufficient support, lack of market information, and inevitably, the one thing you can always fall out about is about the money, so about commissions and prices. What are the differences in types of agents and distributors then? 95% of the time when we're talking about agents, we mean a commission agent. So they identify different clients for you, they warm them up, you do the deal. When you get paid, you pay them the agreed commission. You might want a stocking agent, so you don't actually want a distributor, but you need a certain amount of stock on the ground. So this might be supplied as consignment stock, so free of charge stock until it's paid for. And you'll know whether or not you need a servicing agent, because if you're supplying anything from motor vehicles to photocopiers, you'll need someone on the ground that can respond within 24 to 48 hours if there's a problem with your end customer. Legal definitions then. As we all know, the word exclusive comes up very quickly in any discussion with a potential agent or distributor. So exclusive means the whole market. You might decide, though, that you want to appoint non-exclusive agents or distributors because you feel the territory is big enough, in fact, to be working with more than one. And the final one on there that's, I think, really quite interesting, having a sole agent or a sole distributor. So you'd be able to say to your agent, you're our only agent in France, you're our sole agent, but in fact, there are certain key accounts where we're doing the business anyway, and in fact, perhaps the decisions are not made in Paris, they're made in Düsseldorf, London, New York, so you want to exclude those clients from any agreement. Different types of distributor then. Sole national distributor, so you might decide to have one distributor for the whole territory. You might decide, particularly in large markets, the US, China, India, Brazil, that you need more than one distributor. So you actually divide up the market by specific territories. So if we took the USA as an example, you'd say, well, you're our exclusive distributor, but just for the East Coast, for the Midwest, for the West Coast, just for Florida. So you divide it up by territory. Multiple national product exclusive distributors. In this case, if there are certain products you have that go to different types of sectors, for example, you supply quite a lot to Houston for the oil and gas sector, you may be appoint an exclusive distributor just for that range of products for those end users in oil and gas. Why would you want to use the same distributor for the Midwest, for the automotive sector? It wouldn't be logical if they didn't have the contacts. So again, it's just another way of dividing up a market. What sources could be used to assist you in identifying a good agent, distributor, or partner, particularly in the present time? Well, certainly the team at the Department for International Trade, and we'll talk about our overseas network in a moment. Chambers of Commerce, but I'm not so much thinking about chambers in this country, so it's overseas chambers, Saudi British Chamber of Commerce, Hong Kong British Chamber of Commerce, or actually the British Chamber of Commerce network that we set up a few years ago. So in most countries, we also have a British Chamber of Commerce that is able to do research for you. We have lots of overseas partners, China Britain Business Council, UK ASEAN Business Council, UK India Business Council, OCO that does a lot of work for us in the US. So it's all part of the network. You might know yourself from shows, exhibitions you've attended in the past, that although they're not competitors of yours, there are certain companies, complementary companies who move in the same circles as you. And perhaps they've got some agents and distributors who could also represent you in the territory. Using Google, LinkedIn, other social media, I was talking to one of my clients last week that is trying to find a network of dealers to appoint across the whole of India. They want a minimum of one per state, and they Google potential companies in their sector who could represent them. They come up with 200 names, and they're busy going through that at the moment. Asking existing or even potential customers, if there are people you want to do business with or trading with already, perhaps they could recommend some agents or distributors that they trust, who they get on well with. So the map of the world showing the DIT network around the world. We're in 110 countries, we're in 175 locations. So we've got a lot of staff on the ground in the high commissions, consulates, British embassies, that on your behalf we can contact and say that we've got a client that needs some help. They're looking for for local partners. Probably a good idea if you haven't got one already is considering devising an agent-distributor partner questionnaire. I mean, this could be very useful going to future exhibitions to have it on the exhibition stand, but also when you get unsolicited requests, say from the Indian subcontinent, we'd love to be your agent, we'd love to be your distributor, devise a questionnaire that you can send back to them, and perhaps quite a lot of them you will never hear from again. And to be honest, if they can't be bothered to fill in a few questions about why they really want to work with you, then they're not really serious players. Some ideas about the sort of information you might want to put into your questionnaire: something about their reputation, how long they've been in existence, do our products and services fit with their experience, what sort of geographical coverage can they give us, what other agencies do they hold, who do they represent, and what are these other agencies, these other exporters, think of them, how are the outlets serviced, what do they offer us in terms of a sales force on the ground, frequency of contact with clients. Is it important that you find out where they're located, their offices and logistic facilities? So you can turn some of these into questions for your questionnaire. Anyone thinking about agreements, we always recommend that you go to a legal firm to ensure you draw up a good agreement, and certainly before you sign anything. But if you're just looking for some templates, some draft agreements, the International Chamber of Commerce in Brussels, there's a couple of links there. One is to their bookshop, which has got some really good material that you can buy online. And another direct link there is to model agreements. And you can download a model distribution agreement for about €66. Someone I've worked with for quite a few years when I first found him online is Giles Dixon, who runs the Contract Store website. And I checked recently because Giles has got a whole raft of different types of agreements on there for a nominal cost. And you can download an agency agreement template for just £29 plus VAT. So we're not talking about vast sums of money to get a template. The last couple of slides, I want to talk about getting paid with your distributors. Now, it might well be, as we said in bold at the bottom, that your distributor expects some credit terms for you, but this is a time when we've got to be very careful because lots of companies are going to have cash flow issues. So how well do you know them? Is this the first export order from this distributor? What terms are they requesting? How much risk is involved? And how large is the contract they're thinking of placing with you? So we need to be very careful when it comes to getting paid. Before offering any credit terms, and we could say at this point, actually, it is a risk. And I've spoken to a lot of clients in the last couple of weeks who are saying they're not giving any credit terms at all. It's either cash in advance or they're not taking the business. So check credit references through places like Experian or CreditSafe. Obtain information from local chambers of commerce in this country or overseas. Consider being paid in advance for at least the first few orders. And think about getting credit insurance against non-payment. You could get credit insurance for your whole order book or just considering certain large contracts. If you haven't done credit insurance before or you're having a problem getting credit insurance, we can introduce you to our sister organisation, UK Export Finance, who are there to try and make the credit insurers and the banks say yes so that you can accept these orders. So I'm passing over to Arshad now.
Thank you, Simon, for that. Well, okay, I'm going to talk you through a number of scenarios that some of my clients have already faced due to COVID-19, and talk you to some sort of points on what to consider and things to think about. And before I start, I think we mustn't lose sight of the unprecedented times we are facing at the moment. My advice to you is to be sensible and even-handed, particularly when those relationships that you have valued for so long is dependent upon your own survival. Remember, their success, the success of your agents and your distributors, is your success. So that's very important. So depending on the sector that you're in, you will be facing a number of scenarios. Either you've had an increase in orders, if you're a manufacturer of hand sanitizer or PPE, for example, or perhaps you've seen a lot of cancellations. I'll talk to you about payments and commissions too. So looking at an increase in orders, COVID has created an opportunity and a demand for products and services. This is great if both parties have been able to fulfill orders and demand without any disruption. However, there may be instances where this is not the case. We're all aware how COVID has affected and impacted supply chains. So you'll need to be mindful, particularly with distributors, if they are facing any penalties for late delivery. Perhaps a distributor has a large contract overseas with a major government organization or a key hospital chain, and within those contracts are penalty clauses. So you'll need to be mindful in terms of how to manage that if your own supply chain has been impacted. So that's something to bear in mind. Cancellations. The COVID crisis has affected many sectors and created a downturn. So therefore, you'll need to be prepared, or you're already going through a host of orders being cancelled. And have you prepared for this? Do your agreements that you have in place cater for this? And are you prepared to make exceptions? You might refuse cancellation requests. Maybe perhaps you're looking at your own sales targets and your own budgets, etc., and therefore looking to refuse a certain cancellation. But you might refuse them. That may then create issues further down the line. For example, you're putting your distributor under undue pressure. He'll be taking up stock, tying up his cash for products and services that he may not have a demand for right now. You may end up then getting your payments late or even no payments, which could then have a detrimental impact both his business and your business. Looking at payments, you've supplied goods and you're waiting for payment. Banks are closed in some countries due to lockdown. Money is tight at the moment around the world. Your own distributors aren't getting paid, or the delayed payments, and this will naturally have an impact up and down the chain. There may even be scenarios where the distributor has gone into liquidation. So you need to make sure that your agreements and your terms and conditions of trading, particularly relating to the title of the goods, when does the title of the goods pass over? And that usually is at the time of payment. So you'll need to make sure that you're tightening up on those sort of issues. Looking at commissions, Simon has already said the agent there are European directives already in place. There's also commission agreements and agency agreements that are in place. But you need to be careful here because there are two scenarios that come to play. The agency regulations talk about when commission becomes due, and also when commission has become due and payable to the agent. So when, for example, a principal decides to accept an order from a customer, which is consequently cancelled, what happens? Do you pay an agent or you don't? And the other scenario is, what happens when you're unable to fulfill an order? Do you then pay your agent or not? Well, under the rules and regulations, if your customer has cancelled an order, then commission is not payable. But the other scenario is if you have accepted the order and unable to fulfill it, and the order is then cancelled subsequently, the commission to the agent is payable. So that's something to bear in mind under these sort of scenarios. Now is an opportunity to review. COVID has given a lot of sales managers and marketing and directors an opportunity to review and reflect on where your business is, how it's performing, how your agents and how your distributors are performing. So now is the time, I would say, is to look at reviewing, evaluating the current position. The agreement itself, are you still both engaged and committed? Do you still share the same visions in terms of growth? Does your agent or distributor work your territory well? Are there enough quote requests coming through to you? Is the quote to order conversion ratio high? And most importantly, is the chemistry between both of you right? And is it still there? Ask yourself those questions. Looking at performance, how is the partner, be it an agent or a distributor, how are they performing? How are the sales? How are the leads? How are the inquiries coming in? And look at these over the past few years. Don't look at this at the COVID scenarios in isolation. You need to look at the bigger picture here. Are you fully informed about the challenges, the growth and the opportunities in that market? How does he see COVID playing out and the impact it will have? How prepared is the agent or the distributor for post-COVID planning? That's quite important. That start looking at it now. Once the markets open up and once transport links open up, what is the post-COVID strategy going to be? Has he shared those plans with you? And have you shared your plans with him? It's a two-way relationship, and we mustn't lose sight of that. How about looking at the exclusivity arrangement? If the agreement is up for renewal, perhaps this is time to renegotiate, expand or contract his territory, look at minimum order quantities and commission levels, looking at the pricing as well. You know, you'll get an idea from your man or the boots on the ground how competitive that environment is and how and what sort of price pressures they are under. And I've said it before, the post-COVID strategy. Have you started planning trade shows, campaigns? Have you missed the season perhaps? Your product might be seasonal and the COVID lockdown, perhaps you've missed the season in his particular territory altogether. Or the converse is that you may have missed the season in your own country and therefore you may have excess stocks which your partner overseas could help you offload discreetly over there. So there's opportunities post-COVID here. What are your thoughts? What are his thoughts of a recovery? And have you shared again the plans? If your business has been buoyant during COVID, are you preparing and thought about the flattening of that buoyancy? Once some of those COVID-related critical products, if that's your business, and post-COVID, you'll see a flattening of that. And are you prepared to look at other sectors, other uses for your products? And then importantly, development. This is an ideal opportunity during this sort of lean time, is to develop your partner with product knowledge, company vision, mentoring perhaps, share your expertise with him, share your sales plans with him, share your vision with him. Train him like you would one of your own sales personnel. Make sure he's up to date with his product knowledge, market knowledge, and treat him as one of your own. See this time that you're going to put into this development as an investment. Some legal considerations to take home with you. Now, I've had a lot of customers who talk about force majeure and like they read it off as if it's, it can apply in many scenarios and many situations. And I thought to myself, I'd touch on force majeure today just to give you a bit of a nutshell view of it. I am not a legal expert. You would need to seek legal advice, but for the benefit, just to give you a bit of a flavor of what force majeure is and how it comes into play, I thought I'd just talk you through some of these points. The force majeure is a contractual clause which alters a party's obligations, commitments, responsibilities, or liabilities. Depending on the text, the alteration can be wholly excused, partly excused, or suspended. Like all agreements, as we know, the devil is in the detail. And for a party to benefit or trigger this clause, it will be determined by the precise wording in that contract. Under UK law, force majeure occurs only in contract law. Other countries and jurisdictions may differ in the terms and the circumstances that such clauses can be triggered upon. You'll need to be mindful if you're proposing to remove an agent or distributor under this clause during COVID. These are unprecedented circumstances, and the court or tribunal may see things differently. Does your force majeure list specific events, acts of God, war, terrorism, earthquakes, hurricanes? Where the term pandemic or epidemic has been used, then clearly that will cover COVID-19. Be mindful, there's a difference between an act of government and a recommendation. A lot of insurance clauses are like this too, so be mindful of those when it comes to closing borders, trades, and travel restrictions. Where no relevant event has been mentioned, it is a question of interpretation of the clause, and during unprecedented circumstances, courts are likely to be generous where a party has encountered difficulties in performing. In either case, either party will have to demonstrate 3 or 4 key points here, whether the distributor was prevented from carrying out his duty, whether physically or legally, i.e. it was impossible to perform. Was it hindered? Did it impede on his ability to perform? Or was it delaying the performance, i.e. is looking for an extension of time to deliver the performance figures? Other factors that will come into play is circumstances beyond their control and reasonable circumstances they had taken to mitigate these consequences. As I've discussed, force majeure is not always related to termination. It can be reduction, extension, suspension. And if there is no force majeure clause, there is something called a frustration clause, very, very rarely used. There is no precedent in recent times when such a clause was exercised in terms of a pandemic or an epidemic. There is an extreme case of a frustration clause that was exercised during wartime when a government took over a factory and sold off its assets. As you can see, the frustration clause is exercised very, very rarely. Some take-home points for you then. Consider the detail in the contract and the precise wording. Seek legal advice. Explore alternative options to minimize, reduce, or mitigate. Keep a clear, documented record of the journey you're taking. And talk and discuss force majeure should always be a last resort. Try and avoid going down this route. Looking at breach, I know Simon has talked about breach briefly. I've covered breach under force majeure. You will need to demonstrate if there has been a breach, and you can only do that through the terms that have been highlighted in your individual agreements. Looking at laws and protection, there's a European agency directive that protects agents. Legislation is explicit. If your distributor is acting as an agent, then there's no getting away. Okay. Also consider Asia and the Middle East have their own protection and laws for agents and distributors. And some of these products, for example, medicines, biocides, chemicals, medical devices, they require registration overseas in the name of the distributor or the agent. So when it comes to terminating these issues or a divorce of some sort, you'll need to be mindful whether the agent or that distributor will cooperate fully in handing over or assigning those rights to the new partner. We talked about new opportunities, and I think it's important that we never lose sight, and I've always hammered this home with my own clients. Remember, people do business with people, and we all too often lose sight of that in a digital transactional world. Take advantage of the downtime means people have more time to talk about families, hobbies, sports. People are more relaxed. Take advantage and get to know your agent and your distributor better on a personal level. I think it's a good opportunity once you have time on your hands, whilst you have time on your hands, is to get personal with them, get to know them better. Use the opportunity to garner market intelligence, an opportune moment to speak to your overseas partners about the market, competition, new entrants, new technologies, how your competitors are behaving. Is there new legislation that could potentially affect positive or negatively the demand for your products? And most importantly, think outside the box. Ask yourself, are you thinking outside the box? These are unprecedented circumstances during unprecedented times, but they can also create unprecedented opportunities for the entrepreneur. Are you having those conversations? Have you asked the question, can we supply, source, or manufacture alternative products that are in demand in your partner's country? Conversely, have you considered discussing with your overseas partner the potential of them supplying you raw material which you might be finding a struggle to source? Most manufacturers are encountering supply chain issues. Perhaps that partner now can help you alleviate the raw material shortage. These are just some questions and messages from myself. Simon, back over to you.
So I'd like to pick up on one or two of the things Arshad just been discussing, and particularly potential problems of managing overseas partners during COVID-19. In normal times, if you ask overseas agents how they're getting on with their principals, with their exporters, they'd probably come out with a list of what they regard as potential problems. We always see it from our side, what we see they're not doing, but they obviously look back at the exporters, at the principals, and say they sometimes feel very isolated, they get insufficient support, a lack of information, misunderstandings, and if they're going to fall out about anything, it'll be about the money, about the commissions, about the pricing. So what practical issues can be important in these difficult times to support your partner, build your relationship, and essentially deliver great customer service? I was talking to a client last week about this, and using this opportunity to get closer to your customer, but to your agent, your distributor, your partner. It's all about delivering great customer service. And as a client said to me last week, the sort of comments they've had when they've contacted their overseas partners, that they're so pleased to have their call. They thought maybe they were closed. It's good for them to know what's happening. Oh yeah, we'd love to have some online training. And these days, whether we are Zooming, whether we're on Microsoft Teams, whether we're using WhatsApp, as Arshad just said, this is a fantastic opportunity to get close to our overseas partners. Someone said to me last week, we've always had quite a transactional relationship with our distributor. They've never wanted us to get too close. But now, if we're getting them on video conferencing, we're actually connecting with them in their own home. And, we're hearing their kids playing in the background. So it makes it so much easier to actually build up a personal relationship. So share some personal thoughts with them. They will obviously reciprocate. Use the opportunity to listen to their concerns. What are they really worried about? Outline your position, which might reassure them actually about the way you see things and about the way things are happening back in your business. And Arshad talked about reassessing targets. So it might be we agree some more realistic goals going forward. I'm probably summarizing this in sort of the 3 M's, if you like. So mentoring them, so giving them advice, giving them support, motivating them, encouraging them going forward. And we put in there monitoring because it's a continual reassessment of what's happening, because we don't know their side or our side when we're all coming out of this. So we need to keep in regular contact, and it's a continual reassessment. So to finish off with, just a few points to consider really during COVID-19. We might get many unsolicited requests of people who want to work with us, but what we'd say is, select distributors, select agents, don't let them select you. So be very careful about the unsolicited approaches you have. Undertake some third-party assessment. And when we say that, what we mean is, who are they working with already? If they've got nothing to hide, if they are happy about the way they perform, just give us some contact names of other people they're working with, and we can make a few phone calls, send off a few emails, have some video conferencing with some of their export partners. Approach it as a long-term partnership. We don't want to be hiring and firing agents and distributors. We do want to build up a relationship and see it as a long-term partnership. Draw up an agreement highlighting the responsibilities from both parties. Carefully consider the size of the territory. And it's really up to you whether you decide that agent or distributor in Dubai should really have the whole of the Middle East, and likewise your partner in Singapore, should you give them the whole of Southeast Asia. So perhaps consider a trial period. Be careful of, Arshad and I both talked about payment terms with your distributor. We don't really want to end up with a lot of bad debts at this point. And encourage communication and feedback. It's a great time to do that. Keep in contact with your agents and distributors. Maintain your relationship with them. And finally, during COVID-19, what we'd say is develop your exports with the agents and distributors you deserve. I think, the amount of effort you put in terms of doing your checks, ensuring they are the sort of people you want to work with, they've got the attributes that you're really looking for. So end up with the partners that you really deserve. So at this point, I'd like to pass over to our colleague Brian, who's going to be moderating the question and answer session.
Hi, thanks, Simon. Thanks, Arshad. Terrific presentation. Thanks for questions, everybody. Hopefully, I'll get through them all. If not, I apologize to those who I don't get to in advance. Okay, I've got a couple of questions from Chris, who says, basically two quite different ones. One is, will agents also provide a distribution service? I think that's an explanation about the difference between agents and distributors. And I'll ask a second question as well, which is, export is a great way to grow a business, but is now really the time to be considering exporting? Is it viable, or should you wait until after COVID-19 disruption has died down? So I don't know which of you wants to take each of those.
Well, I'll perhaps kick off, Brian, with the question about agents versus distributors. I think it's an interesting thing because sometimes agents call themselves distributors and distributors call themselves agents. So I think the important thing is what do you actually want them to do? And that's a good reason for having an agreement, because you've got in the agreement what it is both parties agree they're going to be doing for you.
Yeah, Arshad here. I would start looking now. I wouldn't wait until the COVID crisis is over. There are people out there looking for new opportunities within their markets. There is a degree of lean time depending on the sector or the business that you're in. And as I've said before, this is the time to reflect and review your business strategy. So why not start looking now? There's no time like the present, as they say.
Yeah, I think that's personally that would be my view too, and certainly the feedback I've had from clients of mine. Okay, a couple of questions from Paula relating to the US. She asks, how can I find the name of the network you set up in the US? You can either give that or I can drop her a mail. And the second is, the law in some countries there in the US, I'm assuming that by that, Paula, you mean states, such as California, has just changed. How do we make sure we, open quote, hire an agent, close quote, and they don't interpret it as being employed? I'm asking this as I've had this very problem and have already risked my first lawsuit.
Well, my only view on that would be it would be very useful to sit down and have a discussion about it. I don't think without getting the background, we're able to sort of answer that in 30 seconds now. But it would probably involve getting some legal advice. But it sounds like you've got an issue that already needs to be resolved.
Fine. So, Paula, assuming you're listening, could you put a note to us, just giving us your email address, and somebody will get in touch with you. I guess Simon or Arshad will connect with you afterwards. So, thank you for that question. Yeah, a question from Selam. Where can one get data on how a competitor or perhaps the general specific area is doing? So that's I guess a general question about understanding what might be happening in a market.
There are a lot of reports out there, like Mintel and market intelligence reports. Some of the banks also now have portals that you can go on and look at market share and market demand for certain products and commodities. You can even check by HS code in some places. India has an interesting import and export portal that you can slice and dice by HS code and the country that it's come from. So if you know who your competitors are, you know the HS code, you could probably make some intelligent assumptions on who's supplying who in India. There are also trade associations that sell this type of data, and many online portals too that you could visit.
Right. Thanks, Arshad. And Selam as well, if you have a trade advisor, talk to the trade advisor. Often we'll have access to information on what's happening in a market or can get such information. So thank you for that. Got a question from Michael, who says, as head of sales for a marine equipment manufacturer, I look after over 90 distributors in 45 countries. He says, we're awaiting countries to come out of lockdown, allowing the leisure marine market to function. How do we know which countries are lifting restrictions and when?
Your distributors or your agents out in those countries will be the first port of call. I'd say they are more, I've said it before, that they are your boots on your ground. They're the ones that really will know the intricacies and how to interpret the different laws that are coming through. The news is very efficient at the moment, and we know what's going on in terms of which countries are relaxing, which countries are partially relaxing, and which countries are still under lockdown. I would A, look at the distributors that he has in those countries, B, keep an eye on the news, and take the steps from there.
Great, thanks. Got a question now. Please comment on the levels of due diligence, this is from John, required to ensure the probity of an intermediary and compliance with human rights, such as modern slavery.
Okay, so there's a United Nations guiding principles. There's a whole framework on there around business due diligence and human rights. That's the first port of call you could consider and look at some of the guidelines that are in there. And also, if there is an agent or distributor that you have appointed already or seeking to appoint, you could ask him for some references. He may already be representing other European manufacturers and companies, and perhaps you can make some approaches to them regarding what sort of due diligence they did and references around their performance. Simon, did you answer that?
Yeah, that was quite a detailed question, and to be honest, if it's thing about modern slavery and all of that, there's quite a lot of information on the great portal about it. But I mean, we want to sit down with you on a one-to-one basis and discuss it. If it comes to do with due diligence, it's some of the points I put on the slide there. I think if you're really interested in what the experience is going to be, find out who else they're working with. And if you're only going to do one thing, phone up some of the other companies that they've been working with for many years and say, what is your experience? You know, if it's a distributor, are they paying you on time? Have there ever been problems? What sort of service do they give you? There's nothing like practical feedback.
Right. I got a question here from Sahid. Says, I think this is aimed at thinking about managing distributors. What can one do to ensure COVID-19 is not used as an excuse not to do anything?
Well, I mean, we've talked about keeping in contact with them, really. You know, finding out what the concerns are, what they're doing, just supporting them in any way you can. So it's a question of getting feedback. And I do think actually we tend to be quite cynical, because I think exporters are always talking about how lazy the agents and distributors are, whereas they sometimes say we're not giving them the support they need.
Yeah, I agree with you. Time for training and perhaps motivating some of them or incentivizing them. If your agent or distributor hasn't contacted you, are you just as guilty of not contacting them?
I think that's very fair comment. I got a couple of questions connected from Romain. We often let one distributor deal with a larger area first, as you said, a Bahrain distributor dealing with the Middle East. Any recommendation on how to turn this area distributor into a single country distributor without losing the relationship? Right, so somebody who I guess has found that they perhaps given somebody responsibility for too big a territory, and they now want to kind of cut that back a little without losing the distributor, who's obviously very good in one or two countries.
Yeah, that really is a tricky one, and to be honest about it, you know, we can all talk a good game, including myself and Arshad, but we've all been there and probably made the mistakes along the way. It is quite difficult, but I think it's really, if you don't think you're getting sufficient out of certain markets, and it's quite clear that they're very strong perhaps in the market where they've got their business rather than all the periphery markets. I think it's a question of sitting down and saying what you need and what should be the position going forward. I think, again, it's very much about having a dialogue.
Right, thanks. You're getting some good feedback here from people. Keith has complimented on the presentation and has asked, is there a database of DIT contacts as you referred to, and who is my local contact in West Midlands? We can contact Keith with that information, but you know, do you want to just talk about the contacts that we've got around the world and how that works?
Well, we have a lot of contacts around the world. Obviously, we started the world map I showed. It's about the DIT network, but we have so many more contacts. I mean, the sister organisations we have, like China Britain Business Council, UK India Business Council. But I mean, if we take somewhere like the US, just as an example, I don't know who on the call's heard of CASE, the Confederation of American States in Europe. There are about 17 or 18 US states who have a UK or a European office, and we know a lot of who these people are. Now, they're mainly interested in inward investment, but because we know who some of these people are, they will often do a lot for exporters, because they hope a little way down the line, you started as an exporter, but then you've thought, you know what, we need to set up an office. So the Americans tend to play the long game. So yes, we have got a lot of contacts.
Right. Got a good question here from Stephanie. Are DIT, and I'm struggling dealing with them all coming in now, are DIT involved in how couriers are responding to being able to import-export during this time? And what frames are being worked in those countries where we currently ship to?
Are DIT involved? No, they're not. This is a border and a HMRC issue. DIT generally advise and mentor businesses, and this is a freight issue, really. There's some resource online. Perhaps we can signpost them after this webinar.
Yeah, I mean, the
Right,
Institute of Export, Kevin Shakespeare from the Institute gave a really good webinar last week, actually. The Institute are a good source of this, and he was talking a lot about the detail of documents, about freight rates. I know with couriers, you know, DHL, TNT, freight rates have gone through the roof in the last couple of months. So it is a real issue, but the Institute has their finger on the pulse on things like this.
right. Gladys has got a good question here. We're planning to roll out a worldwide marketing campaign to help stimulate markets that are open. One, are we allowed to enforce discounts on RRP as we are giving our partners the discount necessary to give the end client a better deal? So in other words, so I guess what she's saying is that they're cutting prices to their distributors or agents to kind of with a view to getting prices cut in the markets. And she's asking, and I think, are they allowed to enforce the discounts to take place at retail or not?
Again, my view would be we'd have to sit down and talk a bit more about it. I mean, it depends on the laws of that country, doesn't it? So I think we need a bit more detail about that. But I mean, certainly there was an article in the Sunday Times, actually. They say it's going to be carnage on the high street when this is all over. So everyone's going to be cutting prices.
There's also something to be mindful of is if they were tempted to go down the price cutting route, you may be promoting a grey market here. So there's going to be a delicate balance here.
Okay, I've got somebody here. Keith is asking, India is our largest Commonwealth trading partner at present, but has been warned to experience severe COVID problems in density and population size. How can businesses mitigate the potential issues to come with agents and distributors there?
Yeah, well, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because obviously India is a massive market, huge opportunity, very densely populated. Again, it's a question of working with your agents and distributors and seeing the way they see it. I mean, obviously they've got enormous problems at the moment with lockdown as well. You know, it's a case of when they can start to function in any way normally. Brian, I think you made a really good point. I mean, I can speak for, I'm based in Yorkshire. I can speak here that we've got a sales support team that we always encourage people to send their concerns or questions in to speak to us. And like any of the English regions, you know, we would follow up with a trade advisor to try and sort the issue out. Some of them are so specific, you know, we'd need a bit more background really, so we're not viewing something out of context.
Yeah, and on that note, the place to look is great.gov.uk/contact/office-finder/. So you're looking at, if you Google find your local trade office and put in your postcode, they will connect you to somebody who will be able to help you, and our teams around the country will be glad to be of help. I think on that note, I'm probably going to thank our two speakers, Arshad and Simon, for a great presentation, and for Rebecca and Priya for setting this up.
No, thank you all so much. Hopefully that was really beneficial for everybody. And just to reiterate what Brian said about, we will collate questions that are unanswered, and either we'll be able to provide some kind of additional pointers to resources, or we'll also be sending out that link that Brian mentioned for people to be able to get in touch with their local trade officers as well. So hopefully, if your question wasn't answered, hopefully we'll be able to still provide you some support around those. And thank you all for attending today.